screen.
Oh, no problem. It's no problem.
Okay.
All right.
Looks like we're all set.
I think so. I think we can begin. Ms. Ivory.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Personnel Committee meeting this evening. And we are going to start off with Ms. Schlesinger. Katie, please take it away.
All right. Thank you very much. There we go. This evening, we have 2 items on the agenda. I will provide a hiring update, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Roberts-Malamis from Bucks County IU, who's going to give us an overview of the program quality review she and her team completed to support our HR office. So with that, I'm going to start with our hiring update. As you can see here on the slide, I've outlined the positions that have been filled to date, as well as the positions that we have remaining to fill related to the restructure hiring. I do want to add that we are in process with interviews for the project manager of human resources, as well as for the teaching positions for the personalized learning community, and planning to schedule interviews for the in-district secretary and out-of-district secretary for special education quickly in the very near future. So that's where we are with the restructure hiring positions. I also wanted to share an additional hiring update with the positions that we have posted for that represent current known vacancies. I will say that this list is, evolves as we get information regarding any additional resignations or retirements, but this is where we are right now. And hiring managers for the positions have begun the interview process, and we plan to have candidates hired as soon as possible.
Katie, can you please explain so that it's no misunderstanding what the number behind the position represents, please?
Absolutely. It's the number of positions needed to be filled. So for example, for instructional assistant, we're currently hiring for 1. For the guidance counselor, we're currently hiring for 3 at our elementaries. And then I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Roberts-Malamis, who will take us through our program quality review presentation. And before I turn it over to her, I will share a little bit of additional context. I know this has been mentioned at our previous meetings. We asked for this program quality review to ensure that we have the appropriate personnel practices in place to track the collection, review, and handling of employee and contractor clearances. The report that Dr. Roberts-Malamis provided is very informative and gives a lot of robust recommendations, which she will be sharing tonight. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow her to share her screen.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie, for that introduction. And I'm just going to share my screen now. So we have this hopefully seamless, let me get all the people off of that screen. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. First off, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to join you this evening. And I especially want to thank board members for your service. I always make it a habit of thanking board members for their service because I know you all are volunteers and you're out nights and weekends and it's a 24/7 job sometimes and you don't get paid. And the reason I know that is because I'm a former school board member, I'm a former school board president, and I certainly understand how difficult your job can be at times. And oftentimes you hear a lot of complaints, but you don't hear thank yous. So I want to make sure I say thank you to you for your service. Tonight, I'm here to talk about the program quality review report that I was asked to do for the district. And Let me just, before I begin, give you just a little bit of an introduction. I'm sure you're thinking, why in the world should we pay attention to what this woman has to say? And so I wanted to just help you understand a little bit my role at the Bucks County Intermediate Unit. I am the Deputy Executive Director and in-house legal counsel. I've been an employee of the Bucks IU for 12 years now. And when I first came to the IU, I was hired as the Director of Human Resources. And over time, my position grew into what it is today. And while I am no longer the Human Resources Director, Human Resources still reports to me, and Human Resources is truly my passion. I'm very understanding with what your district is going through right now, and especially I'm very understanding with what Katie has been tasked with as a new executive director of human resources. When I came into our IU, we were very far behind. There were not a lot of SOPs, standard operating processes in place. Things were still being done on index cards with pencils. I'm not kidding. And I have spent the last several years helping our IU really develop a best practices rollout of what school HR offices should look like. So I was really happy to come in and talk to your staff and have an opportunity to share some of that information with them. This evening, what I hope to do is just go through the program quality review process with you. I'm going to talk to you about the strengths, and you have a lot to be proud of. So pat yourself on the back, because you've got a really great school district and really great people working for you. And with anything, there's always ways to be better, right? There's always, you can improve in any area. I know our IU could also be subject to improvement in many areas. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit and give you an overview of some areas where you may want to focus on improvement. I'll give you my recommendations. Katie specifically asked me to review a couple of examples of processes and templates with you that the Bucks IU uses that we're happy to have you take that and adapt it in your own way to fit the culture of William Penn School District. And then obviously I'll open it up to any questions. Now, I can't see my screen where you are. So Katie, I'm going to ask if anyone does have questions, if you'll just interrupt me and I'll be happy to address them. And I'm don't want to interrupt the flow, but I can't really see you from the screen I'm on with the PowerPoint on. So thanks. So let me talk to you a little bit about the PQR process, a program quality review. This is one of the services that the Bucks IU provides to our own Bucks County school districts, and then we provide it to out-of-county districts upon request. We do PQRs for all divisions, all departments. We do a lot of technology PQRs. We do a lot of business offices, HR, you name it, and we'll come in and do a PQR for you. I specifically was asked by Dr. Becoats to provide a PQR on select personnel practices and training tracking. And I believe that there was a period of time where it was determined that there were some discrepancies in employee clearances and whether all employees had appropriate clearances on file. And Dr. Becoats, I give you a lot of credit for asking for a complete review so that you understand where there may be challenges, and also so you can understand the strengths. So the PQR process always begins with interviewing your current team. So my assistant and I spent a lot of time interviewing your cabinet members listed there. Dr. Becoats, Katie, we spent a lot of time with her. Kathy Gamble, your HR one of your HR employees who was just lovely. She was helped us on site one day and was a great example of the type of staff you have. And then I also spent time interviewing your director of pupil services, your special education lead, your supervisor of innovation and personalized learning, your business administrator, board secretary, your director of curriculum and instructional technology, and your public relations specialist. And those interviews consisted of about an hour each, and it was simply asking a set of questions about what your current personnel processes are and your current trainings and tracking of those mandated trainings. And that just helped me understand how your district is organized and how things operate. Unfortunately, due to an employee leave, I was not able to speak with the HR team member with primary responsibility for personnel file management. And so a lot of what I'm saying to you tonight and a lot of what's in my report, I certainly put an asterisk letting you know that being unable to interview that employee, I don't want to jump to conclusions. And it's very possible that there are some processes in place, but that particular employee wasn't there to explain them to me. And because your HR team is so new, no one else there really knew what those processes were. So I do want to give you that caveat with everything I'm saying. My assistant and I came on site. We spent about a day in the personnel office with Katie and her team. We reviewed a number of personnel files. We talked about the practices that are in place, and we reviewed your human resource information system, your HRIS system, as well as your Safe Schools training system and how you track trainings through that system. I was also asked by Dr. Bikos if I would review the district's policy manual to ensure that your employee section regarding clearances and training requirements and processes was appropriate and compliant, and it was. Your policy manual looks great, actually. So that's kind of the PQR process. Let me just give you an overview of actually what I looked at in the personnel office files. What my assistant and I did, we arbitrarily came in and we just pulled 10 files. Katie and her team gave us open access. They didn't point us to any one file cabinet or any one direction. They just said, here it is, open drawers and pull whatever. So we just arbitrarily pulled 10 files, 7 employee files and 3 contractor files. And we were looking to ensure that the following information was in the file and in place. So first thing we look for is a signed offer letter of employment. Then we look for Act 34 Pennsylvania State Police background clearances. So that's your state criminal background clearance. The Act 51 child abuse clearance, that's your state child abuse clearance. The Act 114 federal FBI fingerprint background check, that's your federal criminal background check from the FBI. We look to make sure you have PDE form 6004. That is arrest conviction report and certification. And what's important about this form, and this form came into place, I believe, in 2014 from PDE. Because clearances, there's often a lag in clearances, right? So you can accept clearances that are, as long as they're not more than a year old at time of hire, you can accept an FBI clearance, but you need to have this PDE form completed that the employee attests that there's been no further arrest or conviction since that report. And if there has been, that the employee reports that to you. The other part of that form is anytime an employee is arrested or convicted of any specified crime on the form, it's under section 111E of the school code, that the employee is obligated to report that arrest or conviction to their employer within 72 hours. So at the time of hire, you want that form completed so you can review with the employee their obligation to report that information to you. We also looked for the Act 168 form, another form that came into play in about 2014. That's a sexual misconduct abuse disclosure release form. Anytime you go to hire an employee or contractor, you have to send to previous employers where they had interactions with children a confirmation that the employee had not had any sexual misconduct or child abuse activity while in employment. We call this the pass the trash form. This ensures that employees don't just that employers don't just pass one employee to another just to get rid of them. We looked to make sure you had documentation of Act 48 continuing education requirements if it was applicable to a certificated employee. We look for documentation of completion of state required mandated reporter training. Every employee is required to have 3 hours of mandated reporter training. That's child abuse and sexual misconduct training every 3 years. And then we also look to see if the employee completed Act 71 suicide prevention training. And any employee assigned to work with children in grades 6 and up is required to complete that training. We also reviewed medical files, which need to be kept in a separate folder. We call this the confidential file folder. It needs to be kept in a separate locked location to ensure that each employee has a school health form, that's a physical form, and a TB test form completed at time of hiring. We also reviewed HR processes for hiring and onboarding. And I think that was it. So phew, that was a lot. So I'm going to pause. Anyone have any questions about what we actually did in this PQR? All right, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm just going to power through. So here are the strengths that we found, and I really want to give accolades to your district. You have really professional and caring staff members. I cannot say enough about every single one of the employees we interviewed, every single one of the employees we met. They were just really professional and very willing to speak with us, very willing to be completely transparent and completely honest. And oftentimes when we go in to do these type of PQRs, we don't receive that type of rollout. So I really want to stress that my assistant and myself really felt very welcome and felt like staff really were very, very accommodating. Your staff have a real problem-solving attitude. I got the sense from each of them that when there's a problem, they roll up their sleeves and they fix it. And that's great. And I credit that to your leadership. I know that I was told that early on in the year, when it became known that there may be some personnel files where clearances were not in order, that Dr. B. Coach, you got your team together and you just said, we're getting clearances from every single staff member and we're going to roll up our sleeves, and you assigned different members of your cabinet to different buildings and different groups of employees, and you just made it happen. And I give you kudos for doing that. Sometimes just doing that can take months and months, and you made it happen in less than a week. So that was great, a great reaction from you and your team. You have excellent systems already in place. You have an HRIS system that is readily available to track all of these clearances. You have ready availability of training through Safe Schools. That's what most of us use across the state. I use Safe Schools at the Bucks IU. That's an online training program where you can actually assign modules to employees. They complete those modules. It's available online 24/7. And when they complete them, you get a report back, and then you're able to track to make sure that all those mandated trainings are taking place. You can also run reports to see who still hasn't done that training, so you can send reminders out to them. So your online training and tracking database through Safe Schools is excellent. I found that you do provide regular offerings of Act 48 professional development hours. You have set aside days for that, and you apply to PDE to get your employees that Act 48 credit. So that was a real plus. Your policy manual was, I would say it was almost perfect. Every single policy I reviewed was legally compliant. It was up to date. It was based upon PSBA's model policies, so everything was in order. There was one teeny tiny little recommendation that I made to one policy, but it was nothing that was major in any way. And then finally, I want to really commend the staff, because every single staff member I spoke with at some point in some way said, hey, all you have to do is tell us what we need to do, and if there's any changes, we're willing to make them. And that was a really, really great attitude to have. So those were the strengths I found. I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions. Okay. So let me talk to you about areas for improvement. And again, I'm not giving any of this in a way to be judgmental. I'm giving this as, you have a set standard in place, and here's some things I found that you could do to make good even better, and better even best. The first thing I discovered is there really is a lack of uniformity and consistency and even standard processes for maintaining your personnel files for employees and contractors. Some files, depending on the period of time of when the employee was hired, it is clear that there were standard processes in place at that time period. There were checklists I found in the files, and everything seemed to be in order. However, the closer I got to this current year, the more it seemed that those processes had faded away. And I found a real lack of consistency. And I'm going to go through some of that with you. I'm going to give you examples so you can have an understanding as a board member what I'm talking about. I found a need for more formal employee orientation and onboarding, especially for employee and contractor new hires. There's a need to actually assign the required safe school training modules to all staff and then track the staff completions. And in fairness to your personnel office, on the day I was there, they were very short-staffed. Kathy did her very best to navigate that system. It's not a system that she typically uses. So it's possible that what I saw is perfectly fine. It's just that the person that was showing it to me may not have had the understanding because she doesn't typically use it. And that was because the employee, I believe, that is assigned to that is out on leave. You do need to establish a process in HR for the HR team to track your certificated employees Act 48 hours. And what I mean by that is it's the responsibility of the employee to complete their Act 48 hours. It's not on HR to tell them, it's on them. It's a professional responsibility. However, HR staff needs to make sure they understand who may be due to complete their hours, what year they're in, and make sure they do it. PDE is about a year behind. And what happens is you could have an employee who is working in a certificated position who actually has not completed those hours and should not be working in that position. And sometimes it takes a year or more for PDE to catch up. Now, you can see their Act 48 hours online through PIMS and TIMS. As an HR staff member, you can have access to do that. So all you need is a tracking system where you designate each employee at time of hire into their Act 48 cycle, and then you can run reports throughout the year and see how they're doing on meeting their requirements. And then I also found that you really have a need for more rigorous and defined tracking of background clearances for contractors, substitutes, student teachers, and interns. And I'm going to get into this in a little more detail, but that was kind of the generalized finding for areas for improvement. So let me talk about your employee personnel files. Of the 7 employee files that my assistant and I just randomly pulled from file cabinets, not a single employee file was found to be in totally complete order. We found that every file was missing one or more of the following, and truly it was really dependent upon when the time of hire was as to how egregious that missing may be. So these files either lacked a signed offer at time of hire. Why do you want that? You want to confirm that the employees accepted the position, and you want to confirm that the position was accepted at the pay rate. So if there's ever any discrepancy over, well, no, I was told I was going to make $18 an hour and now I only make $15 an hour, you've got an offer letter that's been signed that the employee that specifies the conditions of the employment. I found in one of the files I pulled that the file contained information about another employee. So documents had just been misfiled. They were under the wrong name, and it was confidential documents. I found in a couple of files, there was no school health physical form, and there were no TB test results submitted at the time of hire, and I couldn't find them for any time during employment. I found your FBI rap sheets missing approval initials to indicate who in the office had reviewed the sheet and approved the position for hire. Now, several of them had check marks on them. So that tells me that someone looked at it, but I just couldn't tell who, so that if something had happened and I had to go back, or Katie has to go back and find out, wait, who looked at this and said this was okay, you have no way of knowing that. And typically what you have in offices, you might have that check mark, but you'll have an initial and a date. So you can show who looked at that rep sheet, who said that it's okay to hire this person, and the date that was made. And for those of you who don't know what a rap sheet is, that's your FBI record of arrest. And you really, you want to know who's reviewing that. I found that there was a lack of an orderly filing system. So for example, certifications and other documents were randomly found within file folders with no particular order. It was almost like just things were thrown in some files. Documents were out of sequence and they were not in the appropriate labeled sub-file folders. Several were missing Act 168 forms, and or the Act 168 forms were incompletely filled out. So you typically have 90 days. Once you hire someone, you send out the Act 168 form, you have 90 days to get that back from the previous employer. And you have to show that you've reached out to the previous employer a couple times. And then if you still don't get it back, you can hire the person, but all of it needs to be documented. And I couldn't determine if the forms had been sent out or not, and they certainly had not been returned, or if they had been returned, they were not in the file. There was in one file a lack of any educational transcripts that would support placement of an employee on the salary schedule. I found that some files did include a new employee hiring checklist, which is really good. You need that checklist in HR to make sure you've got everything, because there's so much. While I found other files did not. And so again, I believe that's a period of time that at some point there seemed to be real uniform and consistent hiring practices with that employee checklist, and then somehow that has just gone to the side. There was one form that did not have a PDE form 6004 in it. That's the form that says they have not been arrested or convicted since having their background clearances. Definitely could not determine if folks had mandated reporter training. And that's really significant, because that's the training that you recognize the signs of child abuse. You recognize grooming behaviors. You're taught your obligation as a school employee or as a contractor to report any suspicions of abuse or neglect or sexual abuse or sexual misconduct. You need to be tracking that training. And one file we pulled, the I-9 form, was missing a signature and the appropriate documentation. So again, because of some things being misfiled, I don't want to say that William Penn doesn't have these things, but what I am saying is they weren't in the file. And so I think there's going to need to be some sort of complete review of all files to pull and make sure everything is filed in an organized and sequential way. I want to talk a little bit about the employee confidential files. So every employee should have a confidential file folder. That file folder should be typed up with their name on it at time of hire. That file folder is kept separate and apart from the personnel file. By law, that file folder has to be kept under lock and key. And this is considered to be the confidential file. So very appropriately, all of your confidential files are kept under separate lock and key in the HR executive director's office. They're not out in the HR office. You have to go into the executive director's office, and you have to have a key to open the file cabinet. However, when we looked in that file cabinet, several of the employee files that we had pulled from personnel did not have a confidential file folder. So I was led to think that maybe you only prepared a confidential file folder if you had a medical note come in or something like that. But really that file needs to be prepared at the time of hire. The file folder's there, and then as confidential documents come in over the course of an employee's tenure in your district, that file folder exists to put those confidential documents in. Those confidential files should house all employee medical records. Your employee clearances should be housed in that confidential file, and or any other highly confidential documentation. So all of the clearances that we did find were in your regular personnel file, and those need to be removed to your confidential file folder. So when reviewing the confidential files in the HR executive director's office, we found medical notes that were just in an upright position, seemingly used as a placeholder in lieu of an actual confidential file folder being established for the employee. So the medical note was there. You could read the name of the employee on the medical note, but there was no file for it. And that's really not best practices. You just need to, and I know it takes more time, and this is what I wanted to say to the HR staff. I know it takes more time and everyone is crazy, but you just have to make the label for the file folder and put it in there. It just has to be a practice, an SOP that you do and follow. Each employee should be assigned their own confidential file folder at time of hire, labeled by name. I just said that. And then the other thing that needs to be kept in this confidential file folder is the school health form and the TB test form. And then if someone turns in a medical note, such as they go out on a leave or something, and they give you a medical note saying that they're cleared to return to work, that medical note would be in that file. So since some employees didn't have a folder for their name, they appeared to me to not have a physical form or TB test on file. Any questions about that?
I think we can just continue and then we'll take questions at the end.
Okay, all right. There's just a few more. So another area for improvement are your contractor files. So I was directed, when I asked to see your contractor files, I was directed to a couple of huge manila file folders that were setting out on like a ledge. And they did not appear to be kept in any organized order. They were not organized by name. And the clearances I found in these file folders were copies of the FBI rap sheets only, and there were no other required clearances. It was just the FBI rap sheets. These manila folders were labeled food services and transportation, but there was no similar folder for other classes of contractors, such as substitute teachers or paraeducators that you hire through a third party. Now, it's possible that you keep that somewhere else in your district. I don't know. In most offices, all of your clearances are kept in HR. And that would be my recommendation. There needs to be one spot, and there needs to be one division that's in charge. There was no system on the these file folders with these contractor FBI rap sheets in it. There was no system identifying the employee contracting agency. So I didn't know who the person worked for. There was no system to identify where the contractor was assigned within William Penn. And there was no, seemed to be no review or approval of the hire of the contractor. Now, what I want to say about that was some of the files had a check mark on the rap sheet. And again, that check mark could be interpreted as someone at William Penn having reviewed it, but due to the lack of signature or initials or a date, there was no way for me to know that the contractor had been cleared by your William Penn staff and was approved to be assigned within the William Penn School District. And again, no tracking of where that particular contractor was assigned and whether the contractor still worked in the district. And we know contractors come and go. You really need to have a system where, they're hired and you track them. And then if they leave or they resign, those files go somewhere else. So you have a managed file database of all active contractors. The only other thing I wanted to point out was one of the sheets I pulled just had a long history of charges. Some were charges that were within the last 5 years. I do want to say that none of those charges would necessarily prohibit hiring the individual as a contractor or a school employee under the public school code. So they were not any of those egregious Section 111 crimes, right? But because there were so many on the rap sheet, it would have been helpful to understand who reviewed that rap sheet, the rationale for making the determination that the individual had then the appropriate background to be assigned to work with students. And I do want to say this. It is my experience when I first came into school HR back in 2010, we were really, really particular. If you had anything on your rap sheet, you did not get hired. Back then, there were a lot of employees that were available. We didn't have a labor shortage, and we were very, very particular. Most school districts were very particular. Because there is such a labor shortage right now, I have found over the years, most school districts have evolved. And as long as an individual has not been convicted of one of those egregious offenses found under Section 111E of the Public School Code, they will allow the hiring of someone with something on their rap sheet as long as it's not a recent crime. So for example, we know everyone makes mistakes, right? We know particularly when you're young, you may make mistakes that you later would not make as an older adult. So if there has been a period of time between a particular arrest or whatever, and it's not for anything that would prevent you or cause you morally not to work with a child, you know, there may be a willingness to give the person the benefit of the doubt, hire them on a probationary basis and see how they work out. And I just think that if you are going to hire someone that has a lot of charges on their rap sheet, you just need to make sure that it's documented that you've gone through that process of meeting with the employee, understanding what they have to say about it, and understanding what their history was, and hopefully that there has been nothing within the last 3 to 5 years, so that you can really document that they've turned a new leaf. So I won't say anything more about that. Another area for improvement is employee contractor onboarding. I think the district would benefit from a more formal employee contractor orientation and onboarding system. And I think this is something Katie's been working on and talking to her. So this may be something she's already addressed. But at a minimum, whenever an employee or contractor is brought on board in the district, the following should be reviewed. There should be a signed offer letter of employment if they are a William Penn employee. If they're a contractor, then that offer comes from their contracting agency. You need to review all applicable policies and receive signed acknowledgements of certain key policies. And those policies include the mandated reporting policy and the obligation of the employee to take that 3 hours of training every 5 years. Suicide awareness, prevention, and response, that's policy 819. The acceptable use of internet, computers, and network resources, that's your policy 815. And then maintaining professional adult student boundaries, that's policy 824. So really what you want is some sort of acknowledgement that the employee knows where your policies are located. The employee has reviewed these particular policies and acknowledges that they've read them and that they agree to abide by them. That's really helpful. If the employee is a member of a collective bargaining unit, the employee should be given a copy of the bargaining agreement at the time of onboarding, or directed to where they can find that bargaining agreement on the website. If there are certain expectations that the district has for submitting, for example, tuition reimbursement and other documentation for salary credit, that needs to be reviewed at time of hire. If the employee is a confidential employee, there needs to be an acknowledgement signed that they are considered to be a confidential employee. And then there also should be something signed, and I gave in the actual PQR, I gave examples of all of these acknowledgement forms, but an acknowledgement regarding the employee's responsibility to complete all required trainings and keep his or her certification license status current and valid in order to maintain employment. And the way you track all this is to use a new employee contractor intake checklist. And I can show you what one of those looks like. I did give an appendix in the report that contains all of this information. So here are my recommendations. We're almost to the end. I really recommend a comprehensive review and update of all employee and contractor files. That is really, that's really time intensive. I would suggest the easiest way to do it is to hire a temporary worker or a college legal intern to complete that comprehensive review. and make it a district-wide project. And that person needs to have the authority that when they find something lacking, that they can reach out to the employee and say, hey, I need you to get this to me within a week or whatever. And the employee needs to have an understanding that they have the week or the 30 days or whatever to get that information into their files, or they may not be able to continue to work. You need to establish onboarding processes. And again, I believe Katie's already working on that. Your HR team needs to be trained on the use of Safe Schools and the online training system, how to track, how to pull reports, how to make sure everyone's assigned to the appropriate training, and then pull reports to make sure they're completing that training. I would implement a system within HR to regularly check the Act 48 hour status for employees nearing the end of their continuing education cycle. So for example, at the Bucks IU, every employee, their cycle goes into our tracking database. And any employee that had their Act 48 hours due, say, for example, during the, say, 2021 school year, we pulled a report with that, and then we communicated with those employees, and then we're constantly looking them up to make sure they're completing their Act 48 hours. We're looking them up in the Teacher Information Management System, or PIMS. And then I had one recommendation of a very minor update to the student teachers intern policy, but all of your other policies were fine. Last slide. This is what I wanted to offer to you. And again, your employees are your greatest strength. Your administrative leaders are your greatest strength. I know it's sometimes hard to read about best practices, but I invite the William Penn HR team to come on site to RIU to meet directly with their same job-alikes that do the same job responsibilities they do, and view the recommended approaches in use. So sometimes you learn more by seeing and doing than you do by reading, right? So there is an open invitation, and I've told Katie we would welcome her to come to the Bucks IU and bring her team with you, and we'll arrange meetings for the team with job-alikes, and they can go into systems and they can see this process in action. I am very aware that any recommended process must fit the needs and practices of your school district. So I do not want to in any way suggest there's only one way to do it and you need to do it our way. This is but one example. The templates that I gave you, the SOPs I gave you, the checklist I gave you are just but one example of best practices. I am happy to work with your team to develop what would work best to fit the strengths of your own William Penn structure. And that is it. I will stop sharing this. And I know Katie wanted me to review some of the templates with you, but I'm also looking at our time, and I want to make sure that I leave room for questions. And if you want, I will go in and review like the checklist, Katie, that you wanted everyone to see.
You know, I think folks have access to the checklist. The
Good.
board members already have received that, so they can review. And if there's anything in particular that anyone wants to review with you, happy to do that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you have it in your report, that's great. And listen, there's nothing worse than having to listen to a lawyer at the end of a long day. So I am totally with you. If we were meeting in person, I usually bring chocolate because I find it's easier to listen to lawyers if you have some chocolate. So, so just pretend. Jennifer, I see your hand.
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, because I'm using Katie's speakers.
Oh.
No, that's good. So when you say, are these all really paper files? Like these should all be, they're legitimately paper files?
They are. And I listen, this is something, and I don't know if Mr. Khan is on this Zoom call. This is something you can talk to your solicitor about. PDE requires paper files. PDE has not caught up with the technology. I will tell you that most districts use a blended type of form. So for example, at the IU, while we maintain all the paper files, all of the information is put into our HRIS system. And that's what we rely on to pull reports. So every time a clearance, if a clearance expires, if it's done today and it expires 5 years from today, that date is put into our HRIS system. And that's how we're pulling reports to know who we have to reach out to say, hey, you got to go get your clearances or you can't show up for work tomorrow. The same thing is true with our mandated training and our, we keep what has to be kept in the paper file, but then we rely on that information to add to our HRIS system to help us track everything.
So do you scan those items, or is that just?
Yeah, we do. We actually at the IU, and I'd love for Katie to see this. We just moved, and I'm saying this. I've been at the IU 12 years. We are just in the process of doing it this year. We just implemented a system with Oracle, and Oracle has the capabilities of allowing us to track all employees and all contractors. And prior to Oracle, we were not able to track contractors in our HRIS system because our HRIS system was through SunGuard and it was tied to payroll. So since we didn't pay those contractors directly, we paid invoices, right, that were sent to the business office, to the third-party contracting agency. We couldn't put contractors in that database. It would mess up payroll if we did that. So the new system we have allows us to track both employees and contractors.
Thank you.
Sure. Great questions.
I don't have a question. I just have a thank you. I appreciate the work that you and your staff did to support us. I thank you for allowing yourself to come and support us, and Dr. Bicos and Katie for the ask. Appreciate you all. It's good to know where our triumphs are, but it's also good to know where our challenges are. So I appreciate that, and I hope this doesn't end our relationship, and that we will continue. Your family now that I cut up in before the meeting, your family now. So so thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Listen, I just want to say it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to work with your team. It was a pleasure to work with Dr. Bicos, to work with Katie, with everyone. You really have a great team, and I'm not just saying that. It was really special. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much again. We really appreciate it. And I know she saw me on one of my toughest days so far here at William Penn, and I really appreciate the grace that you gave me on that day. I will say that, so my new team members starting on July 6th. And one of the most immediate tasks that we'll be taking on is reviewing these recommendations and creating a plan to prioritize getting some systems and structures in place for HR operations, including checking the status of clearances, developing a regular plan for tracking those, as well as creating a plan for some temporary support to help with the file review process. And we'll definitely be taking a field trip over to Bucks, so I'll be in touch regarding setting a date for that.
That's great. We'd love to host you. And again, listen, I know this is a lot of information. And again, what I want to say to you is there's not a district that we go into to do a PQR that there's not something, because there's always room for improvement. And Katie, you can walk into our HR department and you could probably tell us a few things too, right? But we're all in this together. We have to share information, and we have to strive our very best to improve. So thank you. And I look forward, hopefully, to continue working with you and help you in any way that the IU can.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from board members or folks in attendance?
So Katie, I do have a question for you.
Sure.
I know this might be early in the process. How long do you think it will take to get the files in order to where you think it's, I guess, satisfactory?
That is a really good question. I don't know. I think it will depend on how much support we're able to get from a temporary person. I think my team and I will be able to sit down and sort of put together a plan for what needs to happen. I imagine once we get someone on board to help us lead that work, we will uncover other issues or things that we didn't anticipate, I'll just being honest. So that will I don't know, but I can continue to keep you updated as we work on it.
Thank you.
And something I know that we will be prioritizing is very quickly, like in July, putting together a robust onboarding process so that at least for every new employee that we're bringing into the district, we're ensuring that their file, you know, we've got what we need from them, their files are in order. So moving forward, those folks will be in a good spot.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
A question. On the policies that were mentioned, 806, the 819, 815, and 824, would there be a need for us to go and look at these policies more in depth? Since we know, about them, contractors should know. They come on board, they should adhere to these policies.
I don't want to, take this away from you, Katie, but I can say I reviewed your policy manual for all of your employee-related policies at the request of Dr. B. Coates, and I found your manual to be fully compliant, up to date. It was excellent. So I don't think there's any, as of right now, I don't think there's any need to update your policies in any way. What I would suggest as part of your employee and contractor onboarding process is you make sure you call attention to those particular policies and you get a signed acknowledgement from your new hire that they have reviewed the policy and they acknowledge that they've read it and they understand it.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Any other questions? All right. Well, with that, I think that actually concludes our session for tonight. So I will hand it over to Ms. Ivory to close us out.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our policy meeting. And again, thank you, Ms. Alamis, for joining us this evening, and Dr. B. Coates and Katie. I agree with Joy. You guys are doing a wonderful job charging yourselves with, addressing any positives and negatives that we are coming across. And just again, thank you both for taking this on. And I hope to see everyone. We are not meeting for the month of July.
Next Monday.
I'm sorry.
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. B. Coates.
No problem.
So we are not meeting for the next month, but we hope that everyone will join us at our next policy meeting. So please keep posted on the website for the next meeting to be scheduled. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.